The royal cruiser of the Valtorian Empire screamed through Earth's atmosphere like a dying star. Metal groaned and buckled as the ship tore apart piece by piece. Inside the command deck, Queen Lyra gripped her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. Sparks erupted from control panels around her. The smell of burning circuits filled the air. Warning alarms screamed from every direction, creating a symphony of chaos that told her everything she needed to know. Her ship was dying and she was going down with it. Lyra's violet eyes darted across the flickering displays. The numbers didn't lie. Hull integrity at 12%. Life support failing. Engines completely gone. Her crew had already evacuated in the other escape pods, scattered across this unknown planet's surface. She was alone now, the last one aboard this metal coffin. Her fingers moved across the emergency controls. The escape pod system was her only chance. She slammed her palm against the launch button and felt the violent jerk as explosive bolts fired. The pod shot away from the dying cruiser like a bullet, throwing her back against the seat. Through the small viewport, she watched her beautiful ship, the pride of the Valtorian fleet, break apart into 1,000 burning pieces across the night sky. The pod had no steering, no control. It was just a metal egg falling toward the planet below. Lyra could only hold on and pray to the old gods her people had long forgotten. The pod hit the atmosphere hard. Fire engulfed the viewport. The heat inside rose quickly. Her suit's cooling system struggled to keep up. Everything shook so violently she thought her bones might break. Then came the impact. The pod smashed through tree branches like they were paper. Each collision sent shockwaves through Lyra's body. She heard the terrible sound of metal crumpling, bending, tearing. Finally, the pod hit the ground and everything went dark for a moment. When Lyra opened her eyes, pain shot through her entire body. Every breath felt like knives in her chest. She looked at her wrist device. The small screen flashed angry red warnings. Her environmental suit had cracked during the crash. Earth's atmosphere was leaking in, and it was poison to her lungs. The oxygen levels here were all wrong for her species. Too much nitrogen. Too much of everything. Her people breathed a carefully balanced mixture of gases. This raw, primitive air was killing her slowly. The device gave her a time estimate. 4 hours, maybe 5 if she stayed calm and breathed slowly. Then her lungs would shut down completely. She tried the emergency beacon. The device flickered once and died. No rescue was coming. Not in time anyway. Through the cracked viewport of her pod, something moved in the darkness outside. A shadow between the trees. Lyra's hand instinctively reached for her sidearm, but it was gone, lost somewhere in the crash. Her vision blurred. Each breath came harder than the last. The shadow grew closer. Lyra thought about her husband, King Theron. Would he even know she died here on this primitive world? Jake Mitchell had been deep in the forest when the sky turned to fire. He'd been tracking an elk for the better part of 2 hours, moving quietly through the trees like his grandfather taught him. Then everything changed. Streaks of light tore across the night sky, brighter than any meteor shower he'd ever seen. One piece, larger than the rest, came down hard maybe 2 miles from his position. The ground shook under his feet when it hit. Jake's first thought was a plane crash. His second thought was that no plane burned that bright. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and started moving toward the impact site. Years as a park ranger had trained him for emergencies. Whatever just crashed, someone might need help. The forest was thick here, full of pine and fir trees that blocked out most of the moonlight. Jake moved carefully, using his flashlight to pick out the path. The smell hit him first. Burning metal, but different somehow. Not like any car or plane fire he'd encountered. Something chemical, almost sweet, mixed with the acrid smoke. Then he saw it. A metallic pod, roughly the size of a small car, buried halfway into the forest floor. The metal was like nothing he'd seen before. It seemed to shimmer even in the darkness, reflecting his flashlight in strange ways. Smoke rose from the crumpled exterior. The whole thing looked like something from a science fiction movie. Jake approached slowly, rifle ready but pointed down. Through a cracked section of the pod he could see inside. His breath caught in his throat. A woman lay there, but something was wrong. Her skin had a blue tint to it, pale like she'd been drowning. She was gasping, each breath desperate and shallow. Her eyes, violet-colored and unlike any human eyes he'd ever seen, stared at him with a mixture of fear and desperation. Jake had seen enough people die in his years as a ranger. He knew what dying looked like. This woman, alien or not, was dying right now. He didn't think. He didn't question. He just moved. Whatever she was, whoever she was, she needed help. And Jake Mitchell didn't leave people to die in his forest. Lyra's translator device crackled and sparked on her collar. Words came through broken and jumbled, but she caught enough to understand. The human was trying to communicate. His hands moved in clear gestures, pointing away from the pod, toward something in the distance. He wanted to move her. Every fiber of her being resisted. This creature was primitive. His world hadn't even achieved basic space flight. What could he possibly do that her advanced technology couldn't? But her technology was dead. The pod's medical systems were offline. Her suit was torn. And she couldn't breathe. Each gulp of air felt like swallowing fire. Her lungs burned with every breath. The human reached in and carefully pulled her from the pod. His touch was surprisingly gentle for such a primitive being. Lyra tried to protest, but no words came out. Just gasping sounds. Jake lifted her carefully, supporting her weight. She was lighter than he expected, maybe 120 pounds. Her skin felt cold through his gloves, almost like touching someone with hypothermia. He'd set up a shelter about half a mile back, a simple lean-to he'd built that morning for his extended camping trip. It wasn't much, but it was better than this crash site with its smoking metal and chemical fumes. The walk took 15 minutes. Lyra drifted in and out of consciousness. Her head lolled against Jake's shoulder. He could feel her breathing getting worse, more labored with each step. He'd seen this before in climbers who got altitude sickness too fast. Their bodies couldn't process the air right. But this was different. This woman wasn't human. He had no idea what her body needed. Jake laid her down inside the shelter on a bed of pine branches covered with his spare blanket. His campfire still smoldered nearby. He quickly fed it more wood, building up the flames. Light. He needed light to see what he was doing. Lyra's eyes fluttered open, those strange violet eyes focusing on him with obvious fear. She didn't trust him. Fair enough. He probably wouldn't trust an alien either. He'd spent 20 years in these mountains. First as a park ranger, then as a survival instructor teaching city folks how to stay alive in the wilderness. His grandmother had taught him even more. She'd been a lummy elder, full of old knowledge about plants and natural medicine that most people had forgotten. Jake never forgot. He'd filled notebooks with her teachings before she passed. He looked at Lyra's symptoms like a puzzle. The blue tint to her skin meant oxygen deprivation. The gasping meant her lungs couldn't process Earth's air properly. The way she clutched her chest reminded him of people he'd seen with altitude sickness, but worse. Like someone breathing toxic fumes. Her body was rejecting the atmosphere itself. Jake moved fast. He grabbed his pack and pulled out a small pouch of wild ginger root he'd harvested 2 days ago. He always kept some on hand. Good for nausea and respiratory issues. He crushed it between 2 rocks, working it into a paste. Then he added pine needles, fresh ones from the branches above. The old-timers used pine for chest congestion. The natural oils helped open airways. But that wasn't enough. He needed something to filter the air itself. Jake looked at his campfire. Charcoal. That was the key. He pulled several pieces of half-burned wood from the edge of the fire, still hot but not flaming. Charcoal was nature's filter. People had used it for thousands of years to purify water and air. He worked quickly, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He took his spare bandana and created layers. First, moss from a nearby tree, dampened with water from his canteen. That would add moisture. Then crushed charcoal, ground fine. Then the paste of ginger and pine. More moss. He tied it all together, creating a crude mask that covered the nose and mouth. It looked rough. Primitive. Like something from the Stone Age. But Jake had learned long ago that simple didn't mean ineffective. Sometimes the old ways worked better than modern technology because they'd been tested over thousands of years of human survival. He gently placed the mask over Lyra's face, securing it with strips of cloth. She tried to pull away at first, her hands weakly pushing at him. But Jake held firm, his voice calm. Easy now. This will help. Trust me. He doubted she understood the words, but maybe his tone got through. For a long moment, nothing happened. Lyra's breathing stayed shallow and desperate. Jake's heart sank. Maybe this wouldn't work. Maybe her biology was just too different. Then he noticed a change. Her breathing slowed slightly. The frantic gasping eased just a bit. Her chest rose and fell more steadily. Lyra felt the change too. The burning in her lungs began to fade. Not completely, but enough. The air coming through the primitive mask tasted different. Cleaner somehow. She looked at her wrist device. The screen flickered weakly, but it still worked. The bioscanner showed her oxygen absorption improving. Slowly but definitely improving. The compounds in whatever paste this human made were bonding with the filtered air, making it more compatible with her respiratory system. It made no sense. Her people had medical databases spanning 10,000 worlds. Computer models that could predict biological interactions instantly. Yet this primitive human with no technology at all had created something her own systems missed. He'd saved her life using nothing but plants and rocks and fire. Exhaustion crashed over Lyra like a wave. Her body relaxed for the first time since the crash. The panic faded. She was breathing. She was alive. Her eyes met Jake's one more time. He smiled slightly and nodded like he understood. Then darkness took her and she fell into a deep, healing sleep. 3 days went by. During this time, Lyra kept watching Jake closely. She found herself becoming more and more interested in how he lived. This human had nothing like what she was used to. No technology. No computers. No fancy machines or advanced tools. Nothing. Yet somehow he was doing just fine in this wild place. More than fine, actually. He was thriving in ways that surprised her. Jake could start fires by hitting 2 stones together in a specific way. Lyra had watched him do this several times and each time she was amazed. On her world, they just pressed a button and heat appeared. But Jake created fire from rocks. He made it look easy, though she suspected it took years of practice to master. When they needed clean water, Jake didn't use any filters or machines. Instead, he built something simple but clever. He layered sand, small stones, and burnt wood in a container. Then he poured murky water through it. What came out the other side was clear and safe to drink. The process was slow, but it worked perfectly. What really caught Lyra's attention was how Jake tracked animals through the forest. He would stop suddenly, crouch down, and stare at the ground. To Lyra, the dirt looked like just dirt. But Jake saw stories written there. A depression here meant a deer had walked by recently. Scratches on a tree trunk told him a bear lived nearby. Broken twigs indicated which direction animals were moving. Lyra tried using her scanning equipment to detect these same patterns. Her advanced technology should have been better at this, right? But her scanners couldn't read the signs that Jake spotted instantly with just his eyes. They couldn't tell her what he knew just from looking at bent grass or disturbed leaves. Then there were the plants. Jake seemed to know every single one they passed. Hundreds of different species. He would point to one and explain what it was good for. This one stopped bleeding. That one reduced fever. Another could be eaten raw, but a similar-looking plant 3 steps away would make you violently sick. He identified them all by looking, touching, and sometimes smelling them. His brain was like a living database, Lyra realized. Except unlike her digital databases back home, Jake's knowledge came with context, experience, and nuance. He didn't just know facts. He understood how things connected to each other. One evening they sat by the fire Jake had built. The flames crackled and popped, sending small sparks into the darkening sky. Lyra had been thinking all day about what she was witnessing. Jake seemed to sense her thoughts. "Your people think we're primitive, don't they?" he said. He spoke slowly and clearly, knowing her translation device sometimes struggled with complex sentences or fast speech. Lyra didn't answer right away. She felt embarrassed because he was absolutely right. Jake continued, "But here's what you need to understand. We learned to survive on this planet when it was actively trying to kill us. I'm not exaggerating. Earth has gone through ice ages that covered entire continents in ice. We faced predators with teeth longer than your arm. Diseases swept through populations. Natural disasters destroyed whole communities." He poked at the fire with a stick, watching the embers glow brighter. "We didn't have fancy technology to save us. We couldn't call for help from the stars. We had to figure everything out ourselves or we would die. And many people did die. But some survived and they learned and they taught others what they learned." Lyra glanced down at her wrist scanner. Earlier in her mission she had used it to scan Earth and log information. The device had automatically classified this world as a Class 3 primitive world. That designation was based on technology levels, energy usage, space travel capability, and similar measurements. But sitting here now watching Jake and thinking about everything she'd seen, that label suddenly felt wrong. Primitive was supposed to mean simple, basic, unsophisticated. It implied a lack of development or intelligence. Yet Jake's knowledge wasn't simple at all. It was incredibly vast and detailed. It was just stored in a different way. Not in computer chips and data banks, but in human minds and passed through teaching and stories. "How did you know how to help me?" Lyra asked. She was thinking back to when her ship crashed, when she was hurt and confused. Jake had known exactly what to do. He treated her injuries with plants and techniques that seemed almost magical to her. Jake smiled slightly. It was a small grin that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Same way I know which berries won't kill you," he said. "Somebody tried it first." He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "Trial and error. That's how we learned everything. Somebody ate a berry and lived, so we knew it was safe. Somebody ate a different berry and died, so we knew to avoid it. Generation after generation we tested things, made mistakes, discovered solutions. We paid for every piece of knowledge with real experience. Sometimes painful experience. Lyra looked at him with new respect. Every fact Jake carried in his head represented not just information but human history. Real people had lived and died to build that knowledge. It wasn't downloaded or programmed. It was earned. She was beginning to understand that intelligence and advancement couldn't be measured by technology alone. Humans had something her civilization might have lost in their rush to modernize: a deep, earned wisdom about survival, nature, and adaptation. The Valtorian fleet appeared suddenly in Earth's orbit. One moment the sky was empty, and the next, dozens of massive ships materialized like a cluster of falling stars. They hung in space above the planet, their metal surfaces gleaming in the sunlight. Each vessel was enormous, dwarfing anything humans had ever built. King Theron stood on the command deck of his flagship, his eyes fixed on the viewing screen. He was Lyra's husband, and the moment her distress beacon had activated days ago, he had dropped everything. He gathered every available ship within range and ordered them to jump to her location immediately. Nothing else mattered. His wife was in danger on some unknown world. Now, looking at his tactical display, Theron studied the planet below. His scanners swept across the surface, analyzing everything. The results made him frown. No satellites orbiting the planet. No defense grid protecting it. No space stations. No signs of advanced civilization at all. The planet barely registered on their technology scale. Insignificant, he thought. How had Lyra ended up here? He gave the order, and the landing party prepared to descend. Multiple ships detached from the main fleet, heading down through the atmosphere. Theron was in the lead vessel, surrounded by his best soldiers. They were armed and ready for anything. Their armor gleamed and their weapons hummed with power. The sensors worked perfectly now that they were closer. They locked onto Lyra's biosignature quickly. She was in a mountainous region, surrounded by dense forest. The ships adjusted course and headed straight for her location. As they approached the coordinates, Theron watched the live feed from the forward cameras. Then he saw her and his whole body tensed. Lyra was standing in a small clearing. But she wasn't alone. Next to her stood a primitive biped, a native creature of this planet. The being was clearly one of the locals his sensors had detected. What shocked Theron most was what Lyra was wearing. Instead of her royal clothing or even basic Valtorian garments, she wore animal skins. Rough, crude coverings made from the hides of beasts. Across her back she carried a bow and a quiver of arrows. Primitive weapons. Tools that belonged in a museum, not in the hands of a Valtorian queen. Had she been forced into this? Was this creature controlling her somehow? The ships landed with precision, surrounding the clearing. Soldiers poured out, their weapons raised and ready. Every gun was pointed at the human standing next to Lyra. Theron's tactical officers had already classified the native as a potential threat. The order to neutralize was one word away. Theron stepped out of his ship, his eyes locked on the scene. His soldiers moved forward, fingers on triggers. But then Theron raised his hand sharply, commanding them to stop. Something wasn't right about this picture. He watched Lyra's body language carefully. She wasn't cowering. She wasn't showing any signs of fear or distress. Instead, her posture was defensive. But she wasn't defending herself from the human. She was positioning herself between the human and the Valtorian soldiers. She was protecting him. "Stand down," Lyra commanded. She spoke in their native Valtorian language, and her voice carried the unmistakable tone of royal authority. Every soldier recognized that voice. It was the voice of their queen, and it was strong and clear. "This man saved my life when our technology failed," she continued, her words firm and deliberate. Jake stood a few paces away from Lyra. He kept his hands visible, holding them away from his body where the soldiers could see them. But despite being surrounded by armed aliens in advanced armor, he remained remarkably calm. His breathing was steady. His expression was neutral and alert. Jake had faced dangerous situations before. He'd encountered aggressive bears, startled mountain lions, and territorial wolves. He'd learned long ago that staying calm was the most important rule when facing a threat. Panic made things worse. Quick movements triggered attacks. These aliens looked nervous, and nervous beings with weapons were incredibly dangerous. So Jake stood still and waited. He made no threatening moves. He just watched and assessed, the way he would with any unpredictable animal. Theron walked forward, his boots crunching on the forest floor. His translator device activated automatically, converting his words into the local language. He stared at Jake with cold eyes. "You captured our queen," Theron began, his voice hard with accusation. Jake interrupted him before he could finish. "I rescued your queen," he said clearly. He didn't look away from the alien king's eyes. He didn't flinch or show fear. He met Theron's gaze directly, the way he would with any creature trying to establish dominance. "Your fancy pod was killing her," Jake continued, his tone matter-of-fact. "I used what I had to save her life." The words hung in the air. Theron's soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Some of them glanced at each other, uncertain now. The human's confidence was unexpected. Before Theron could respond, Lyra moved. She stepped directly between her husband and Jake, forcing Theron to look at her instead. Her eyes were fierce. "He speaks the truth, Theron," she said firmly. "My medical pod malfunctioned. It was poisoning me instead of healing me. My environmental suit failed completely. It couldn't process this planet's atmosphere properly. All of it, every piece of technology one carried, failed me." She paused, making sure he was listening. "Your technology failed me," she repeated, emphasizing the word your. "The equipment you insisted was foolproof. The systems your engineers promised were perfect. All of it stopped working when I needed it most." Theron's expression shifted slightly. A flicker of doubt crossed his face. "But his knowledge," Lyra gestured to Jake, "saved me. He had no computers, no scanners, no advanced medicine. Just knowledge passed down through generations. And that knowledge kept me alive when everything we built could not." The clearing was silent except for the wind moving through the trees. The Valtorian soldiers lowered their weapons slightly, confused by what they were hearing. Their queen was defending a primitive. She was crediting him with saving her life while criticizing their own technology. Theron looked from his wife to the human and back again. He was a king, a military commander, a leader of one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. But right now, standing in this primitive forest, he was also a husband who had nearly lost his wife. And she was telling him that this simple human with Stone Age tools had succeeded where all of Valtorian science had failed. Theron stood there in the clearing, his pride clearly wounded. Everything he believed about his civilization's superiority was being challenged by his own wife. She was defending a primitive over their advanced technology. The idea didn't sit well with him at all. "Show me," Theron demanded, his voice tight with skepticism. "Prove that your primitive methods are worth more than our science." Jake looked at the alien king for a moment, then simply shrugged. "All right," he said calmly. He had nothing to prove, really, but he understood that sometimes people needed to see things with their own eyes to believe them. What happened next would change everything the Valtorians thought they knew about Earth and its people. For the next hour, Jake became a teacher. He educated an audience of the most technologically advanced beings in the galaxy, showing them techniques that humans had perfected over thousands of years. The Valtorian soldiers and officers gathered around, watching closely. Some looked curious, others skeptical, but all of them paid attention. Jake started with medicine. He found a piece of old bread that had developed mold on it. To the aliens it looked like spoiled, worthless food. But Jake explained carefully how this specific type of mold could be used to create antibiotics. He described how his ancestors had discovered that certain molds could fight infections and save lives. The Valtorians had antibiotics too, of course, but there's required laboratories and complex manufacturing processes. Jake's method just needed time and the right conditions. One of Theron's medical officers stepped forward, scanning the moldy bread with a device. His eyes widened as he read the results. "The compound structure is crude, but it would work," he admitted reluctantly. "It would actually fight bacterial infections." Next, Jake moved on to navigation. He pointed up at the sky, even though it was still daytime. He explained how humans learned to navigate using the stars at night. He showed them how to read wind patterns by watching how clouds moved and how trees bent. He demonstrated how to follow animal trails to find water sources, because animals always knew where water was. "No computer needed," Jake said simply. "No satellites. No GPS. Just observation and knowledge." A Valtorian navigator frowned. "But what if your sky is clouded? What if you cannot see the stars?" Jake smiled slightly. "Then you use the moss on trees. It grows thicker on the north side in this region. Or you watch where the sun rises and sets. Or you follow water because it always flows downhill toward larger bodies of water. There are dozens of methods. If one fails, you use another." The navigator had no response to that. His technology was incredibly accurate, but if it failed, he would be completely lost. Jake had multiple backup methods that required nothing but knowledge and attention. Then Jake demonstrated fire starting. He pulled out his stones and showed them the technique he'd used to help Lyra. Strike the right type of stone against steel or another hard stone, aim the sparks at dry tinder, and blow gently to encourage the flame. Within minutes he had a small fire burning. "Your power cells are amazing," Jake acknowledged. "But they run out eventually. They can break. They can get wet or damaged. This method works anywhere, anytime as long as you have the right materials. And those materials are almost everywhere on Earth." Theron's military advisors were shifting uncomfortably now. They were beginning to see something troubling. Each primitive technique Jake demonstrated solved a problem that their technology also addressed. But Jake's methods had a crucial advantage. They worked without power sources, without electronic circuits, without complex systems that could malfunction or fail. The final demonstration was the most impressive. Jake asked if anyone had a minor injury. One soldier had cut his hand earlier during the landing. The wound wasn't serious, but it needed attention. Jake examined it briefly, then went to work. He gathered specific plants from the surrounding forest, plants he'd pointed out to Lyra over the past few days. He crushed some leaves to extract their juice, explaining that they had natural antiseptic properties. He used thin strips of bark as bandages. Then, using a piece of sharp stone he quickly shaped and a needle he'd carved from bone, he demonstrated basic field surgery techniques. The Valtorian medical officer watched in stunned silence. "The wound closure is effective," he said quietly. "And those plant compounds are actually preventing infection. I can see it on my scanner." Jake cleaned his hands and stood up. "On Earth, doctors performed surgery for thousands of years before they had your kind of technology. They set broken bones, delivered babies, removed infected tissue, saved lives. The tools were simpler, but the knowledge was real." The clearing was quiet. Every Valtorian present was thinking about what they'd witnessed. Their certainty was shaken. Finally, Theron spoke. His tone had changed completely. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like respect. "Your people survived and dominated one of the galaxy's more hostile planets," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Without technology. Before technology even existed for you." Jake nodded. "We didn't have a choice," he replied simply. "Earth doesn't care if you're smart or strong or advanced. It will kill you just the same if you don't adapt. So we adapted. We learned. We survived. And eventually we thrived." "Adapt or die," Theron repeated quietly. "And you chose adapt." "Every single day," Jake confirmed. "For hundreds of thousands of years. That's why we're still here." Lyra stepped forward and placed her hand on Jake's shoulder. She looked at her husband and the assembled Valtorians. "The galaxy has a system for classifying worlds by their technology level," she said clearly. "We measure advancement by computers, by space travel, by energy production. But we've forgotten something crucial in our rush to judge others." She paused, making sure everyone was listening. "Technology is a tool. Just a tool. It's not a measure of intelligence or capability or worth. These humans built an entire civilization using nothing but their minds, their hands, and their determination. They earned every piece of knowledge through experience. They paid for it with blood and sweat and generations of hard work." Theron stared at his wife, then at Jake, then at the primitive forest surrounding them. His entire perspective was shifting. He'd come here expecting to rescue his wife from savages. Instead, he'd found something he never expected, a people who might be more resilient than his own. He was silent for a long moment, thinking. Finally, he nodded with decision. "Earth will be reclassified," he announced. His officers looked surprised, but he continued firmly. "And when humanity reaches the stars on their own, and they will do so having earned their place. Not as primitives to be pitted or conquered, but as equals who proved their worth." As the Valtorian fleet prepared to depart, Lyra approached Jake one final time. She held a small device in her hand. It looked simple, but Jake suspected it was incredibly advanced. "First contact," she said quietly, pressing the device into his hand. "But on your terms. When your people are ready, use this to call us. We'll be waiting." Jake accepted the device and nodded. "Thank you for trusting us." "Thank you for saving me," Lyra replied. "And for teaching me something my people had forgotten." The Valtorian ships lifted off smoothly, their engines humming with power. Jake watched them rise into the evening sky, becoming smaller and smaller until they were just points of light. Then they vanished completely, jumping back to wherever they'd come from. Jake stood alone in the clearing for a moment, holding the alien communication device. Then he smiled slightly, tucked it safely into his pack, and turned back toward his cabin in the mountains. The galaxy would learn soon enough. Humans weren't primitive. They were survivors who had become apex predators on a world that showed absolutely no mercy to weakness. They'd done it without any help, without any technology, using only their intelligence and will to live. And that made them more dangerous, more capable, and more worthy of respect than any advanced civilization could imagine. The end.